Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the N64. You know it, you love it, or you hate it, and you're one of those people, which is a thing. But today, yes, we're going to be doing a little bit of a love video for the N64. Very specifically, we're going to be talking about the Everdrive 64. Now, the Everdrive 64 is not even close to a new concept. In fact, this one that's sitting right here is actually almost 10 years old. I've had it for almost the entire span of the time I've been on this channel, yet I never did a video on it because back then I was really only focusing on Dreamcast stuff, and it kind of fell to the wayside, and I just never really got back around to it. But we are going to be talking about it today, but not this one. This is the old one. There is actually a new one, and it comes courtesy of retrotowers.co.uk. I'll put a link in the description. You can check them out. There's also a coupon code. You guys can save some money if you buy anything over there. So first, big shout out to Dan there for hooking me up with this. And again, full disclosure, like this was sent to me for free for the purposes of review. But if you're not familiar with the concept of the Everdrive, well, okay, where have you been? But basically, if you're not, it's a flash card for various game consoles. The name Everdrive is a brand, but it's kind of become like Kleenex, where it's known also as the product now. It's not tissues, it's Kleenex, even though Kleenex is just the company's name. Flash cards were around for a very long time, but they were usually very badly designed. Everdrives, when Krikzz unveiled them, he's a guy in Ukraine who builds these things. Ever since he unveiled that line, it's just become the gold standard for quality when it comes to these things. Concept is simple. Hey man, what if I have a single cartridge, I put an SD card in it with all the games, and I just have every game ever made for that particular console on one go? Good idea. But like I said, this card is 10 years old, so there has been some changes. So let's go ahead and take a look at the new one and talk about those changes. Okay, so again, this comes from retrotowers.co.uk, and this is the Everdrive 64 X7. Now, this particular version has various changes over the original. Like, this is the OG. Like, I got this, it says copyright 2011, so it's almost 10 years old. This one has had multiple differences assigned to it. So first and foremost, that is obvious to me is it's now region free, which I think is a big deal. Apparently, the original versions, while you could change the region coding, it was a switch on the board itself and not readily accessible. You'd have to actually take it apart to get to it. Whereas these automatically region detect whichever console they're in. So they'll work on a North American console, a Japanese console, a European console, an Australian console. Whatever you've got, it'll work on it. The shell is also custom too, so that it gets rid of the tabs. So the tabs are also region free, so you don't have to deal with that kind of thing, which is awesome. On top of that, it also has onboard software that now allows it to play any version of a game. So even if you got it to physically fit into a North American console and you tried to load up a PAL ROM, originally that wouldn't necessarily always work. In this case, it will. So it has a greater sense of compatibility. Now, speaking of the compatibility, there was a lot of under-the-hood type of changes that were made to make more games function correctly. While the original one did function, a lot of the times there would be some games that just couldn't work for whatever reason. A lot of games on the N64 had some quirks to them, you know, and some still do, but a lot of those quirks have been addressed. So while I will not go so far as to say that this one plays every single game ever released for it or anything like that. Oh, I just noticed that yeah, Dan also included a card to retrotowers.co.uk. While I won't go so far as to say this has 100% compatibility or anything, I know that he made an effort to kind of get way more of the little things to function that didn't originally work, so that's awesome. And it's, so, you know, that's great right there. What other changes were made? It now has GameShark support, which was actually a big deal for me because originally, when I got this one, I wanted to play with GameShark codes. I put an actual GameShark in it and it worked once. And then when I turned the GameShark back on, the GameShark no longer functioned. It had been rewritten in some way, so the GameShark was killed. So I was like, oh, learned a lesson, don't do that. This one has an onboard GameShark, so you don't have to deal with it. The irony of this feature, though, is that I can't actually make use of it yet. And the reason for that is that in order to use it, you either have to manually insert the codes like you would on original GameShark. Original GameSharks came preloaded with a ton of codes. You could add more if you wanted to. This one's blank. It's a GameShark that has no codes on it. You can add them by typing them in through the N64, or more logically, you can get text files and put them on the SD card and then just have it preset from there. That's what I want to do, but I'm hoping, and this is where I go out to you guys, if anybody out there has pre-made Nintendo 64 GameShark codes in text file format, please let me know. That way I can take them and install them on this, and I'll put a link in the description so people can download it if that ever comes to fruition, because I think it would be great to have that option. Because if you ever play games with codes, like, it's fun. It's like makes the game completely different depending on what the game is. So yes, that has that built-in support. It also has expanded memory capabilities, specifically when it comes to saving a game to the internal memory of the cartridge is now more robust than it was originally. It also has a feature that allows you to clone a memory card. Now, the reason that might be significant is if you had a game back in the day that you were playing on an original cartridge, you could, if you really wanted to, potentially move that game save from that one internal cartridge to a memory card, from the memory card to this card internally, and bada bing, bada boom, you are now playing your original game save from your original cartridge, yet you're now playing it on the flash card version, which I think is pretty neat. So that's a nice little bonus. And it also has some other just random... Oh, okay. Other big one, before we get into the little random ones. The other big feature that has been changed that I think... I didn't know anything about this until I started looking into this particular cartridge. It now has a patching system. Now, the patching system has a lot of uses. It can allow it to play more of the unreleased games and like the homebrew type of stuff and that type of thing. If you want to do like little upgrades here and there, it does have that feature. But the patching very specifically that can come of it, there's bug fixes sometimes, or there's things like disabling 50 hertz and enabling 60 hertz, that type of small thing. But the big one is the ability to disable the anti-aliasing mode. The N64, Nintendo had made the decision to create an anti-aliasing kind of buffer. The idea was that the N64 had a pretty decent color palette, but they wanted to kind of buff it out to make it look less jagged. The result of that was that kind of like foggy look the N64 is known for. With this, provided you find the correct ROM set and you find the correct patches and combine them, which the cartridge will do automatically if you have everything lined up correctly, it will actually disable that fogging. Now, what happens is the colors get much better, so I understand, but the buffering kind of obviously goes away, so it gets more jagged. So what I'm wondering is, if you get the better colors and then add something like an M Classic to it, will that just kind of be the best of both worlds? So I'm super excited about that, and I had no idea that was a feature going into this. So that's going to be very cool. Other little things, it has a full NES emulator on it. Now, that's actually not new. The original version had that, but I'm just guessing. I don't actually know this, but I'm guessing there's been some updates to that emulator over the course of the last 10 years. So that's probably a bit better, though I'm going to be completely real with you. I have zero intention of playing NES games on the N64 through the Everdrive. Like, it's a bonus feature. Some people would get a kick out of it. Some people might even use it, but for me, it's just kind of, nah, I don't need that. Yeah, and supposedly, and this is why you're seeing it here, supposedly this also allows 64DD games to work, which is what you're seeing underneath the N64. If you're not familiar with it, this is an official Japanese add-on for the Nintendo 64. Very uncommon. I don't know, though, if you actually need the 64DD to make them work, or if it can run without them. That's what we'll find out. I haven't seen anybody talk about that, so I'm going to try it for myself because I actually have the 64DD, and we can check it out and see what the results of that are. But yeah, beyond that, it should be relatively straightforward. It has two ports on the side. One is a USB port, which you will most likely never need. This is really just for development and things like that. People who really know what they're doing, that's not going to be most of us. So you essentially don't need to ever worry about that. The other side is a micro SD slot. The original one actually used a full-size SD card, but because full-size SD cards are now becoming less and less common, they're being replaced by micro SD cards, which is also good for development because they save on space, which only sucked for me because I had to go around and try to find one. I have a ton of full-size cards laying around, but not really that many micros, especially when it comes to this file size. This is a 128 gigabyte card. The entire N64 collection is 20 gigs, maybe, if that. I don't even know if it's that big. And so it's not even close to that big. What am I talking about? So you really wouldn't need anywhere near that much space. So with this card, I've decided to share a couple of different platforms all on one card just to be economical. But basically, once it's all preset, which I've gone ahead and done, it should just plug in and then boom, you're good to go. All right, so I've been using this thing for a while now, and it's time for final thoughts. Basically, it's pretty good. I mean, that's not surprising. It's an Everdrive. Those are always very solid. So what I did was I just kind of went through and tested all those newer features that I discussed. And results were pretty good for the most part. There were a couple of oddities. So let's go over each one of them. First of all, the region protection. As stated, it is region free. It should boot just about anything. Keyword is just about. So when it comes to the North American library, for the most part, you're going to be fine even without that feature because by natively, the N64 can read both US and Japanese stuff. From a hardware perspective, the only thing that was preventing Japanese games from working was physical plastic tabs in the back. This bypasses that problem, so basically what I'm saying is the only thing you would have to worry about is the PAL stuff. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really see any reason you would want to play, say, the PAL version of Goldeneye instead of the NTSC version if you have an NTSC console, but technically you can do that with this. But the real advantage would be to play the PAL imports. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to their exclusives, they only kinda had 7, and I say kind of because 3 of those 7 did come out in Japan. Now, the only reason I would include them is because they came out in Europe in English, but did not come out in the US at all. I believe it was Air Border 64, Center Court Tennis, and Rakuga Kids. All 3 of those had Japanese and European releases, but they're fully in English in Europe. So with this, you could play those and essentially get 3 totally brand new games. They also had 4 exclusives wholly their own, which was like 2 of them are like sports games, one's like a racing game, and then the other one is the most unique one, which was Taz Express, which was basically a 3D platformer featuring Taz from Looney Tunes. That one was the one I was the most curious about because that one was kind of infamous because of some special chip or something on it that was done that made it almost impossible, if not impossible, to properly play in any sort of import device. In fact, when I got that game at one point, a friend just sent me a PAL N64 with it because he's like, I couldn't do anything to make it run, so here's just a PAL N64. So I was curious what it would do. And it did boot. And you got full color, it was playable, the speed was right, but it made no sound of any kind. So clearly that game doesn't work with this still, despite it probably works better than it used to, but Krikzz, if you're watching, I don't know if it's possible to do any sort of update for that, but that is one game in particular to take a look at. But the other PAL games that I tested all seem to work just fine. There's even patches to get some of them to run at 60 Hertz, though I couldn't get those particular patches to work, but that doesn't really matter so much. But they seem to play fine. So imports, there you go. Now, when it comes to the DD64, this was a little bit of a heartbreaker. I had gotten some bad intel. I was told that with this you could play the DD64 library. The thing is, that's not true. Even with the DD64 or 64DD, it does not recognize the N64 DD ROMs at all. It doesn't know what to do with them, so it doesn't even try. But that doesn't mean it's completely useless in that regard. There is one game that's kind of an exception to this, and that would be F-Zero X. Now, in Japan, F-Zero X for the N64's like traditional cartridge slot had additional functionality if you had this. This is the expansion pack for the 64DD. You can kind of think of this as physical DLC. So let's just pretend for a second that this is F-Zero X. You could pop that in and play it this way, and you would just get F-Zero X. However, if you had the 64DD, and you had this particular cart, and you plopped it in just like this, and then booted it up, it would start running, and the game would detect that you have that, and it would give you all the extra features of this particular device. If you run the ROM of the Japanese version of that game with the Everdrive, that combination does work. But that's it. That's the only 64DD functionality that I was able to get to actually run or do anything. So that doesn't really count, but it's just kind of worth noting, I think. So yeah, there's that. With the GameShark stuff, I tested that for a while. The game I was running specifically with that was Goldeneye. Now, I didn't find any sort of code pack. Again, please, if anybody out there has a whole bunch of pre-made text files with codes, that would be wonderful. I'd love that. But I didn't find any. So with that, I just made my own specifically for Goldeneye, and I went in and tested them. For the most part, it was working. It ended up crashing a couple of times, but I think that was just one particular code, because as soon as I turned it off, the game ran fine. So that might have just been a mistype on my part or something like that. But yeah, that was totally solid, and I gotta say, it's pretty easy. Like, once it's in there, it's saved, it's all good to go, which I really like. So what I'm probably going to do, if nobody has those code packs, I'll probably just make a couple for my favorite games and just call it a day on that one, and that'll be about it. But yeah, I liked that. I liked being able to actually use the codes with the games. Now, let's talk about the patching, because that's one of the biggest selling points of this thing compared to the older versions. And how did that work exactly? It wasn't quite as smooth as I was hoping, and when I say smooth, I mean the actual process of using it. So when you're tinkering with this thing, you'll notice that if you select a ROM, you have two options. Well, you have a few options, but two that are pertinent here. One is to just basically load the ROM and then start the game up, and then there's one to just load the ROM. Now, it was my understanding that if you told it to load the ROM and start the game, it should automatically patch the game, provided that you have a folder called Auto that is full of the patches. I have that, but it never worked automatically, ever. So the only way I could get it to patch was the manual way. Now, the way you do that is when you pick the ROM you want, you just select it without starting it. You then leave out of that menu, you go to the Auto menu, and you find the corresponding patch. Then you tell it to load, and then it says, okay, confirmed. And then at that point, if you start the game, the patch loads. Now, I got this to work almost all the time. I think Star Fox 64 was the only game I couldn't get to patch properly. When I got it to patch, it just stalled and didn't start. Not every game has a patch, of course. But in most instances, like I played it with Goldeneye for a while. I tried it with Resident Evil 2. I tried it with Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64. And I gotta say, it does really make a difference. It's pretty noticeable. Like, it becomes vastly more jagged. That's very apparent. But the color palette becomes much richer. It's very nice. So you connect an M Classic to it, and it doesn't perfectly buff it out, but I gotta say, man, like, that is probably how I'm going to use the N64 from now on, is I will play my games mostly through the Everdrive with the patches where supported, have an an M Classic attached to it, and kind of call it a day. I might do a video about that separately, all by itself, for anybody who's interested. You guys let me know if you think that's worth talking about. But otherwise, the patching thing is pretty cool, and the quality that comes from it is actually pretty nice. Trying to think if there's anything really else to tell you. I didn't have any games that just like straight up refused to boot or anything like that. Like I said, we just had a couple of oddities for one reason or another. But yeah, overall, it's totally solid. I didn't try any of that NES stuff because, like I said, I really don't care about it. It's a bonus feature. It's still there. I did try the memory backup thing. That worked smoothly. No issues there. Although it would seem that the amount of memory on this thing isn't as big as I would have hoped, because after I did the transfer, I started playing some games, and games started telling me, like, hey, there's no more memory left. And I was like, oh, okay, so maybe it's not that big. I'm not really sure. But that's unfortunate. But maybe that's just a limitation of how it has to work. I don't really know. But yeah, I don't think there's much else to say. I guess I would say I recommend it. If you already have the original, honestly, as someone who really likes to get the best video quality out of stuff, even if you have the original, let's say sell the original and get the new version. Or if you've never had it before and you're into the N64, I can't recommend it enough on that basis, because, man, like, this is the best I've ever seen it look on original hardware. And even if you're like the emulation guy, you're like super into that, N64 emulation is still not exactly perfect, which is part of the reason you have never seen an N64 Classic from Nintendo. But yeah, I'd say it's pretty solid. I rather enjoy it. And if you want to check it out, again, go to retrotowers.co.uk. Get it from them. There's a link in the description. I'll include a coupon code, as I mentioned before, so you can get some money off the order. But yeah, that's about it. With Krikzz, man, you know you're getting a solid product. So, and with Retro Towers, you're getting quality service. That I can assure you, because we only talked about it, and like 2 days later, even from the UK, it was already here. So it's like, oh, man, that's impressive. So there you go. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. If you could like, comment, and subscribe, check out all the social media stuff in the description. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all later.